He sent some money to my bank account, but I have to pay for tax first before it reflect in my balance. The architecture of silence, I used to think silence was just a lack of noise, an empty space between sounds, but I've come to understand it's something else entirely. Silence, when it's complete, has a texture. It's a thick, heavy velvet that drapes over everything in this house, muffling not just sound, but time itself. I live in a home built for echoes, the laughter of children, the deep rumble of my Robert's voice, the clamor of a family coming and going. These were the sounds that used to fill these rooms, to bounce off these walls until they were warm. Now the walls just absorb, they've become sponges for quiet. My day begins with the truest silence. The moment I wake up, there's no soft snoring beside me, no radio alarm tuned to the news Robert would listen to with one eye open. There's just the faint digital glow of the clock on my nightstand, 6:17 a.m. It's not an invitation to start the day. It's just a statement of fact. The day has arrived, empty and long. I make my way downstairs, my hand trailing along the banister Robert installed himself. I can feel every minor imperfection in the wood, every ridge his sandpaper missed. I know this house better than I know my own face in the mirror these days. I know which floorboard in the hallway groans with a particular lonely protest under my Wait, I know the exact spot by the kitchen window where the afternoon sun pools warm and stagnant for exactly 47 minutes before moving on. The kitchen is a monument to just one, a single cup in the drainer, a single plate, the coffee maker, which once brewed a full pot for two and the occasional sleepover guest, now has a miniature cousin that makes exactly one mug. The hiss and gurgle it makes is the loudest sound of my morning. I take my coffee to the sunroom we called it that optimistically, though it only gets good light for a few hours. I sit in what was always my chair and I look out at the yard. I still tend the yard, that's one thing. The rose bushes Robert planted for our 20th anniversary Crimson Glory. He knew they were my favorite, they need care. The hydrangeas, the tidy boxwoods. It's a performance, you see, for the neighbors, for anyone who might glance over. It says everything is normal here. A nice lady lives here, and she is keeping things up. It's the outer wall of the architecture. Inside, the architecture is different. It's built around absence. The dining table, for instance, is a vast, polished lake of mahogany. It can see Tate comfortably. I eat at the kitchen island on a stool. The table is four. What? I don't know. It holds a tasteful ceramic bowl I never put fruit in for fear of it rotting and a stack of books I've already read. It's a stage with no play. And the photographs there everywhere, of course. David beaming in his graduation gown, Melissa caught mid-giggle as a toddler, Robert with his arm around me at some long-ago beach, squinting into the sun. They are beautiful frozen echoes, but they don't speak. They just watch me move through the silence. Sometimes I talk to them. I'll say, Melissa, your hair was such a riot then, or Robert, you always hated that shirt. It's not that I believe they hear me. It's that the silence becomes too dense, too loud, and my own voice is the only tool I have to puncture it, even if it's just a whisper. My children, oh, my beautiful, busy children. David in Denver is a man perpetually balancing on a tightrope. There's the merger, he says, a word that sounds both weighty and vague. And the twins, not twins, sorry, the teenagers with their college tours and their existential angst I only hear about in snippets when he calls his voice has a hurried, compressed quality, like he's speaking from a moving vehicle. He always ends with, I'll call longer soon, Mom, I promise, and I believe he means it. But soon is a shapeless word that gets lost in the chaos of his life. Melissa, my daughter in Seattle, her love is a series of emojis, a heart, a smiling face, a bouquet of flowers. It arrives in a text that says, thinking of you. And it's like a small, bright bird alighting on my windowsill before flying off again. Her world is a whirlwind of twin toddlers' birthday parties, not twins. I have to remember, her boys are 2 years apart, but they travel in a pack, soccer practice, and a husband whose job is a series of time zones. Our Sunday visits, when they happen, are a lovely, exhausting blur. She brings the noise with her, the clatter of diaper bags, the high-pitched chatter, the spilled juice. For an hour, the silence is vanquished, and then they leave, and the silence doesn't just return. It rushes back in, richer and deeper for the contrast, settling into the crumbs under the table and the single forgotten sippy cup on the sofa. I am not bitter. Please don't think that. I raised them to be exactly this, independent, engaged, building their own symphonies. I am so proud it aches, but I was the conductor of our family's symphony, and now the musicians have moved on to their own orchestras. The music they make is beautiful, but it's played in other concert halls. Far away, I'm left in the empty hall with only the program notes and the memory of the melody. So I build my days, the grocery store where I linger in the aisles, listening to the mundane dramas of other people's lives. He forgot the list again. She only eats the orange crackers, the post office, the library. These are my errands, my tiny expeditions into a world that feels both too loud and utterly indifferent. By evening, the silence becomes a physical pressure. It's on my chest. It lives in the hollow of my throat. That's when I turn to the blue light of the computer. It's a window, isn't it? A promise of connection. I'll scroll through Facebook and see the evidence of everyone else's noise. David's family at a Rockies game, Melissa's boys covered in finger paint, my old friend Carol on another cruise ship with a drink in her hand. I'll like them. I'll comment. Looks like fun. Or handsome boys. It's my way of tapping on the glass of their lives, a gentle, polite tap. I'm still here. Don't forget I'm here. Then I'll turn it off, and the silence will be absolute. The refrigerator will hum its one-note dirge. The house will settle on its foundations with a sigh, and I will sit in the architecture I built with a man I loved, surrounded by the ghosts of our noise, and feel the vast, echoing truth. This isn't just a quiet house. It's a quiet life, and I am so very, very lonely inside it, the echo of a finished symphony. I remember with a clarity that feels almost cruel the moment I realized I had to start building a new score for myself. It was about a year after the last of the big milestones, the final parent-teacher conference, the last college move-in day. The house had completed its transformation from a bustling command center to a very quiet museum. Robert had been gone for 3 years by then, and the sharp, screaming grief had softened into this constant, companionable ache. But the silence was a new enemy. It wasn't violent. It was patient. It would wait for me to finish a task, to put down a book, to take a last sip of tea, and then it would rush in to fill the space like cold water flooding a sinking ship. So I decided to become a joiner. That's what you're supposed to do, isn't it? The articles in the magazines at the doctor's office all say so. Cultivate new interests. Reconnect with your community. It sounded so sensible, so proactive. My first foray was the Thursday afternoon literary society at the community center. I'd always been a reader. Robert used to tease me about my stack of doom on the nightstand. I pictured a circle of thoughtful women, perhaps a few interesting men, discussing motifs and metaphors, the conversation sparkling like the lemonade I imagined would be served. Reality was a circle of folding chairs in a fluorescent lit room that smelled faintly of chlorine from the adjacent pool. The book that month was a best-selling thriller about a dog walker who witnesses a murder. We didn't discuss the prose or the pacing or the characters' motivations. We discussed the main character's apartment. Was it realistic for Greenwich Village? Then Margaret, who'd recently returned from a Baltic cruise, segued seamlessly into the cost of similar apartments in Reykjavik. Susan chimed in with a story about her granddaughter's tiny studio in Seattle. For 45 minutes, we talked about real estate and travel packages. The book was merely a forgotten bookmark. I offered a timid comment about the author's use of first-person perspective, and it landed in the conversation like a stone in a pond, creating a few ripples of polite, puzzled silence before the talk washed back to shore excursions. I left with a smile pinned to my face and a loneliness deeper than the one I'd brought with me, their worlds. Were full of cruise itineraries, grandchildren's achievements, condo boards. I had nothing to contribute but a thought about a fictional character's point of view. I felt like a ghost trying to hold a conversation with the living. Undeterred, I signed up for a watercolor class, Discover Your Inner Artist. The flyer promised. I'd always loved the soft, dreamy quality of watercolors. I bought the supplies, the little metal tin of paints, the special paper, 3 brushes of varying thickness. The instructor, a vibrant woman named Fiona with a cascade of silver bracelets, taught us how to do a wash for the sky. Let the water do the work, she'd trill. I tried. I'd wet the paper and drop in a bit of cerulean blue, watching it bloom and feather at the edges. It was beautiful. Then came the land, a gentle slope, Fiona suggested, maybe a few suggestive trees. But my brush, once it touched the damp paper, had a mind of its own. The green for the grass bled into the blue of the sky, creating a murky, melancholy swamp. My trees looked like lonely, dark smudges, while the other students, a retired dentist painting a surprisingly competent Tuscan villa, a young mom creating a cheerful, lopsided sunflower, chattered and compared techniques. I sat silently, adding more water, more pigment, trying to fix the blur, but I only made it muddier. The paper began. Two pill. Fiona came by, placing a kind hand on my shoulder. Don't fight it, Edith. It's about the flow. But all I could see was the emptiness I'd created, that vast, washed-out sky with nothing to hold it up, those formless trees unmoored. My landscape wasn't a scene. It was a feeling. It was the inside of my head on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. I never went back. The tin of paint sits in a cupboard, a monument to the discovery that my inner artist only painted in shades of absence. The lunches with old friends were perhaps the most poignant exercise. We'd meet at the same nice but not too expensive bistro we'd been going to for decades. The hugs were genuine, the smiles warm. We'd order the salmon salad because it seemed the sensible thing to do, and then the recitations would begin. It was our version of the news. Jean would lead with her latest from the orthopedic front, a detailed account of her knee replacement's progress, complete with descriptions of physical therapy exercises that made me ache in sympathy. Then Paula would offer an update from the Grandchild Theater, a funny story about her 4-year-old grandson's existential crisis over the color of his socks. There would be nods and laughter, and then a pause. The pause would turn to me, "And how are you, Edith? What's new with you?" What could I say? The silence in my house was particularly resonant this morning. I successfully cleaned out the junk drawer. I thought a lot about Robert when a certain song came on the oldies station. My news was not news. It was the quiet maintenance of a solitary life. So I'd say, "Oh, fine, keeping busy. The roses are coming in nicely," and I'd quickly ask a follow-up question about Jean's knee or Paula's daughter's promotion. I'd become an expert interviewer, deftly steering the spotlight away from the blank page of my own existence. I could see the faint flicker of relief in their eyes when I did. They cared for me, but they didn't have the vocabulary for my kind of quiet. Their lives were narrated in busy, bustling chapters, medical updates, family dramas, vacation plans. My life felt like a book where the story had ended, and now there were only blank pages. I would drive home from those lunches, the taste of coffee and polite conversation lingering, feeling a strange, hollow fatigue. It was the fatigue of performance, of pretending my solitude was a choice, a peaceful simplicity, and not a vast, echoing hall where the only sounds were my own footsteps and the quiet, desperate rustle of turning those empty pages, waiting for a sentence, any sentence to appear, a message in the blue glow. The rain that Thursday wasn't a storm. It was a sigh, a long gray exhalation that blurred the world beyond my windows into a watercolor much more skilled than my own. It turned the familiar yard into a smudge of greens and browns, and the street into a slick, dark river reflecting the bleak sky. This was the kind of day the silence feasted on. It grew fat and settled into the upholstery, pressed itself against the window panes, filled every corner until the very air felt thick and difficult to breathe. I'd done my rituals, the single cup of coffee, the pointless straightening of already straight pillows. I'd even attempted to read, but the words on the page swam before my eyes, disconnected and meaningless. The clock on the mantel ticked with an absurd, booming authority, each second a tiny hammer on the anvil of the afternoon. Finally, as the early twilight of the rain began to deepen, I surrendered to the blue glow, the computer word to life, a fanfare in the hushed room, Facebook, my digital window, my sometimes charade of connection. I scrolled, a blur of sun-drenched vacation photos from people who seemed to live in a different, brighter climate. A political rant from a cousin I hadn't seen in 20 years. Melissa had posted a video of the boys attempting to bake cookies, flour absolutely everywhere, their shrieks of laughter tinny through my speakers. It was a burst of beautiful noise that made the silence in my room immediately afterward feel even more absolute. I typed, "My future master chefs, love you." and hit enter. My little tap on the glass. I was about to log off to face the long stretch of evening with the television for fake company when the little notification icon glowed red, a new friend request. My heart did a foolish small leap. It was probably someone from the watercolor class or a forgotten high school acquaintance, but still it was a ripple in the stillness. I clicked. His name was Charles Voss. The profile picture was arresting, not in a flashy way, but in a substantial one. He was standing on a rocky coastline, the sea dramatic spray behind him, silver-streaked hair swept back from a broad forehead. He was squinting slightly against the imagined sun or wind, and it created gentle crinkles around his eyes that looked kind, a thoughtful face. A face that had known weather and thought. He was dressed in a simple dark sweater, no pretension. I hesitated. I was careful, or so I told myself. I looked at his profile. It wasn't locked. There were a few other photos, one with a young woman, his arm around her daughter, Sophie taking on Paris. The caption read, another older, faded-looking of him and a lovely, smiling woman with gentle eyes. My Clara always with me, a widower. My own heart clenched in sympathy, a recognition of that particular shade of loss. His listed interests were unassuming, sailing, history, antique roses, antique roses. A week before, on a page dedicated to heritage gardens, I'd commented on a photo of a magnificent empress. Rose, ID written, the layers of petals hold the color like a secret. Nothing modern compares to its fragrance. It was a throwaway line, the kind of thing I'd write to feel like I was part of some conversation anywhere. His message was attached to the request. It was not a generic hi, let's connect. It read, Dear Edith, I hope this isn't an intrusion. I came across your comment about the Empress. On the Heritage Roses page, you described the petals holding color like a secret. I've looked at that rose 100 times, but I never saw it that way until I read your words. They had such grace and insight. I was compelled to reach out. Forgive me if I've overstepped. Charles, I read it, then I read it again. He had seen. My words, not just skimmed them. He had absorbed them, tasted them. He found grace in them, insight. He was compelled. For years, my words had been functional. Don't forget your lunch. The doctor's appointment is at 3. I'm fine, just tired. They were coins spent in the economy of daily life. Then they became echoes in an empty house. They were the unheard comments at the book club, the unspoken thoughts during lunches with friends. But this man, this stranger with the kind, crinkled eyes and the dead wife and the love for old roses, he had found a handful of my words that had escaped into the digital world, and he had held them up to the light and found them beautiful. The silence in the room changed. It was no longer a pressure. It became a held breath. The gray rain outside the window was no longer dreary. It was a soft, private cocoon. The relentless ticking of the clock faded into the background. My fingers, usually so hesitant, hovered over the keyboard. What could I possibly say? A simple thank you seemed too small. To ignore him felt like slamming a door on a room suddenly filled with light. I took a breath, the first deep one I felt I'd taken all day. I clicked accept, and then, before I could lose my nerve, I began to type a reply. Dear Charles, not an intrusion at all. Thank you for your incredibly kind words. The is a particular favorite. It seems we both appreciate the stories that old things carry. As I typed, something strange happened. The hollow fatigue from the long, lonely day began to recede. The empty page of my existence, which had felt so blank and daunting an hour before, now seemed to have the faint, promising shimmer of a first line. It wasn't a story yet, but for the first time in a very long time, it felt like one. Might be possible. The blue glow of the screen wasn't just a window out anymore. It felt for a fleeting, terrifying, wonderful moment like a Doran. The virtuoso of attention, the first conversation was a delicate thing, a butterfly alighting on an open palm. We talked of roses. Of course we did. It was our shared ground, our safe soil. He knew the crimson glory was a climber, a sport of the Paul's scarlet. He asked if I'd ever grown the thornless Drowan and its scent of raspberries. I told him about the one Robert had planted by our bedroom window so its perfume would drift in on summer nights. I typed that a small intimacy offered and held my breath. He didn't rush past it. He wrote back, a man who plants a rose for his wife's window is a man who understands the soul. He must have been a remarkable person. He didn't just acknowledge Robert. He honored him. My throat tightened. That was the first lesson in Charles. He listened, not the way my friends listened, waiting for their turn to speak of grandchildren or gallbladders, not the way my children listened, with one ear on their own buzzing worlds. He listened with his whole being, his responses proving he'd absorbed not just the facts, but the feeling beneath them. Our chats moved from the private message box to longer emails, then to the video calls. Seeing him was both a shock and a comfort. The man matched his voice, a calm, deep baritone, and his picture. The silver in his hair was more pronounced, the crinkles around his eyes deeper when he smiled, which was often. His backdrop was usually a tasteful, slightly anonymous room, a study with shelves of books, a living room with a modern painting, another hotel. He'd sigh with a wry smile. Singapore this week. The project here is endless. He was a civil engineer, semi-retired, but consulting on one last major bridge in Malaysia. He spoke of steel and concrete with a surprising poetry. It's about creating a spine for the land, he said once, a way for people to cross from one kind of life to another. I thought of my own life, feeling so stuck on one barren shore. He asked questions, not the polite, superficial ones. He asked, "What book left a permanent mark on you, Edith?" When I faltered, mentioning a novel I'd loved decades ago, he didn't just nod. A day later, a link arrived in my email, an old, haunting recording of the book's author reading a passage. The note said, "I thought you might appreciate the sound of the voice that built those words. No one had ever done something like that for me." He shared music, not random songs, but curated pieces. One evening, when I'd mentioned feeling restless with the rain, a link arrived. It was Sinatra's In the Wee Small Hours of the Morning, the exact album Robert had loved. The first mournful notes floated through my speakers, and I gasped. Charles's face appeared on the video call. Concerned, is it too much? I only thought, the rain, the late hour. It seemed to fit. "It's perfect," I whispered, tears in my eyes. It was a coincidence, surely, but it felt like a message in a bottle, sent directly to the shores of my memory. He'd remembered. He became a daily sunrise. My mornings, once a slow march into emptiness, now had purpose. I'd wake and check my email, my heart quickening at the sight of his name. There would be a story about a funny mistake on a blueprint, a breathtaking sunrise over the Strait of Malacca, a memory of Clara planting her first herb garden. His world, vast and international, felt open to me, and in return he treated my small world with a reverence that made it feel vast again. He'd ask about my watercolor class. I confessed my failure, my muddy landscape. He laughed, not unkindly. "My dear, you were painting a Turner." All atmosphere and emotion. They probably wanted pretty postcards. You gave them a storm. He renamed my failure Turneresque, and in his telling, it became something brave. We spoke of loneliness. He was achingly honest about the hollow quiet of hotel rooms, the weariness of room service for one, the way the echo in a spacious suite could feel like a taunt. "You have a home at least," he said one night, his face soft on the screen. "I have interchangeable rooms. I have views, but no vista that feels like mine." I understood. We were both untethered, but from different things. One night, after a particularly sweet and easy conversation about our favorite films, he grew quiet. He looked directly into the camera, his blue eyes earnest. "You have become a lighthouse in my foggy world, Edith Mayfair," he said, his voice thick, "a fixed, bright point I steer by." The words stole the air from my lungs. A lighthouse. Not a forgotten bookmark, not a ghost in the room, not a polite interviewer, a beacon, something strong, necessary, guiding. I was seen, not for what I could do, grandmother, volunteer, hostess, but for who I was in my quietest self. He listened to the silence between my words and understood its language. He asked for nothing but my thoughts. He offered a mirror that reflected not an old woman in an empty house, but a woman of insight, of grace, of value. The architecture of my days began to subtly shift. The silence was no longer an enemy to be filled. It was a fertile ground where his words would later bloom. I'd walk through the grocery store thinking, I must tell Charles about the peculiar mangoes they have today. I'd deadhead the roses, imagining describing the feel of the petals to him. The empty house was no longer just a museum of my past. It was becoming a studio where I composed my thoughts to share with him. The loneliness didn't vanish. It simply changed shape. It was no longer a vast, empty plain. It was now the specific aching space between our video calls, the wait for his next message. And in that specific ache, there was a terrifying, glorious kind of hope. He was building a bridge, plank by careful plank, with every shared song. Every remembered detail, every word that said, I see you. And for the first time in years, I was desperately eager to cross it, the proposition. It was 6 weeks to the day after that first message about the roses. I'd begun to mark time in a new way, BC and AC, before Charles and after Charles. The AC days had a different light, a different weight. They were anticipatory, threaded through with a quiet, humming energy. I even caught myself smiling at nothing while loading. The dishwasher, Robert's old sweater, which I still wore on chilly evenings, didn't feel like a shroud of grief anymore. It felt like a comfort, a soft armor as I ventured into this new, surprising world. We were on a video call. It was late morning for me, but for him in Kuala Lumpur, it was the deep of night. He was in his hotel suite, the light slow, a half-empty glass of something amber on the desk beside him. He looked tired, but it was a good tired, the kind that comes from hard, meaningful work. He'd been telling me about the final inspection on the bridge pylons, the satisfaction of seeing something conceptual become immovably real. Then he sighed, a heavier sound than usual, and ran a hand through that silver-streaked hair. The crinkles around his eyes seemed less like laughter lines and more like seams of stress. What is it, Charles? I asked, leaning closer to the screen. The urge to soothe, to care for, was a physical pull. It had been so long since anyone had needed my comfort. It's the final payment, he said, his voice weary, the last big tranche from the Malaysian consortium. It's stuck. How? International red tape, he explained, a flash of frustration crossing his face. Because I'm technically a resident of the UK, but the payment is in Malaysian ringgit, and I want it in my US dollar account for when I move. He paused, letting the unfinished thought, when I move to be with you, hang unspoken but shimmering in the digital space between us. We'd begun to sketch that future in soft pencils, a cottage, maybe in Oregon near the coast, a garden, space for his daughter to visit. My financial advisor has a solution, he continued. He can route it through a trusted us bank account. It's a purely procedural dance, darling. A few clicks for him, a temporary landing place for the funds, and then it clears all the regulatory hurdles and comes straight to me. But it needs a us account to land in first. He looked directly at me, his blue eyes earnest, tinged with a vulnerability that made my heart clench. Edith, I know this is an immense thing to ask. It's a significant sum, but you are the only person in America I trust, the only person in my world right now with the kindness and the integrity for something like this. The air left the room, a significant sum, the only person I trust. The words were like two giant stones dropped into the still pond of our intimacy, sending out conflicting waves. A cold trickle, the last remnant of my old cautious self, traced its way down my spine. Bank details, money, online. The world was full of warnings about this, but then I looked at his face. This was Charles, the man who remembered the Sinatra album, who called my failed painting Turneresque, who saw a lighthouse in me for 6 weeks. He had given me the most precious gifts, his time, his attention, his respect. He had asked for nothing in return but my thoughts and my company. He had rebuilt a sense of my own worth, brick by careful brick. This wasn't some stranger in a dark alley. This was the man who shared his loneliness with me, who spoke of his late Clara with a tenderness that mirrored my own for Robert. This was the man who was planning a future that included me. The cold trickle was warmed, then evaporated by a surge of something else, profound, flattering, necessary trust. He needed me, not just for conversation, but for something real, something tangible. He was handing me a key to his practical life, not just his emotional one. After years of feeling redundant, of being the person who was managed, don't worry, Mom, we'll handle the taxes. Sit down, Mom, I'll get that. Here was a capable, worldly man saying, I need your help. It was an intoxicating reversal. What? What would I need to do? I heard myself ask, my voice softer than I intended. Relief flooded his features. Just your bank's name, the routing number, and your account number. That's all. My advisor handles everything from there. The funds will appear as a pending transfer. Then once the tax verification is processed on your end, just a simple form, he'll send the entire amount releases to me. It should be in and out in 48 hours. He leaned forward, his face filling the screen, his gaze so intense I felt it in my bones. Edith, I would never jeopardize what we have. This is just paperwork. It's me, Charles. I'm sharing the complications of my life with you because I see us as a team. A team. The word dissolved the last fragment of doubt. I was no longer Edith. Mayfair, lonely widow. I was Edith, trusted confidant, essential partner. Of course, Charles, I said, the words feeling both terrifying and right. Of course, I'll help you. The gratitude that shone from his eyes was my reward. It was brighter than any sunlit spot in my kitchen. I had passed a test I hadn't known I was taking. I had chosen faith over fear, trust over isolation. Later, as I fetched my checkbook to find the string of numbers he needed, my hands trembled slightly, but it wasn't entirely with fear. It was with a sense of momentous occasion. I was stepping out of the audience of my own life and onto the stage with him. This was the first real, concrete plank in the bridge he'd been building between our worlds. It was made of numbers and trust instead of wood and steel, but it felt just as solid. I was helping him cross from a life of lonely hotel rooms to our promised future. I typed the details into the chat box, my fingers steadying as I did. I was not a fool. I was a partner. I hit send, and with that click, I felt it in my heart open wider than I ever imagined it could. I had given him my trust. Now I waited for him to prove it was rightly placed. The silence in the house as I waited for his confirmation wasn't empty. It was electric with possibility, the first plank of the bridge. The 2 days that followed were a peculiar kind of limbo. My ordinary life, the grocery run, the watering of the roses, the reheating of a single serving meal felt like a play I was acting in, a hollow pantomime while my real consciousness was elsewhere, tethered to my email inbox. I'd given Charles the numbers. The act itself had felt both intimate and terrifying, like handing over the key to a private room in my soul. He'd been effusive in his thanks, his messages full of warmth, and the busy sounds of him coordinating with his financial advisor, a man he referred to as Graham. I pictured Graham as a serious man in a bespoke suit, working in a glass-walled office high above some city, deftly untangling the bureaucratic knots of international finance. A flutter of caution, that old dull-winged thing, would sometimes rise in my chest. I'd hear a snippet of a news story about online scams, or remember a stern warning from David about never sharing personal details, but then I'd push it down hard. This wasn't some anonymous email from a prince. This was Charles. His face, his voice, his stories were my armor against doubt. To doubt him felt like a betrayal of the profound connection we'd built. It would mean the last 6 weeks of sunrise in my soul had been a mirage. I couldn't accept that. I chose actively and fervently to believe. On the morning of the 3rd day, the notification chimed, an email from Charles with the subject line, "All processed confirmation." My hand shook as I clicked it open. There was no lengthy text, just a single stunning image attached. It was a scan of an official-looking wire transfer confirmation. The header bore the logo of a Malaysian investment firm, all sharp angles and serious typography. The details were a blur of financial jargon, but a few lines leapt out. Beneficiary, Edith Mayfair. Amount, USD $285,000.0. Status, pending awaiting regulatory compliance clearance. $285,000. The number sat on the screen, surreal and monumental. It wasn't greed that swept through me. It was a dizzying sense of consequence. This was real. This was the tangible proof of Charles's world, a world of bridges and contracts and large, serious sums intersecting with my own quiet, small one. He had done it. He had trusted me, and the machinery of his life had responded. A warmth spread through me, a pride that was entirely new. I had facilitated this. I was part of something significant. Charles's message below the image was brief. "See, my darling? The first step is done. Graham says the funds are poised to enter your account. You should receive notification from your bank shortly. The bridge is half built." The metaphor thrilled me. He was still building our bridge. This was a major support pylon, now sunk into the bedrock of my bank account. I refreshed my online banking page again and again. Nothing. An hour passed. The initial thrill began to temper with a low-grade anxiety. Then a new email arrived, not from Charles, but with my bank's logo in the sender line. The header read, "Urgent action required on incoming international transfer." My heart hammered against my Ribs, this was it, the official link. I opened it. The email was impeccably formatted, full of the legitimate-looking disclaimers and fine print I associated with real banking correspondence. It explained that due to the size and international origin of the funds, a mandatory regulatory compliance hold was in place to release the hold and allow the $285,000 to post. To my account, a one-time international transaction tax needed to be settled. The amount was $2,850. It provided a link to a secure payment portal and a stern warning that failure to settle this obligation within 24 hours would result in the funds being returned to the originator and possible account restrictions. The logic felt cold, bureaucratic, and utterly plausible. Of course there would be a tax. Of course the bank would want its due on such a large sum. It was a gatekeeper demanding a toll. I called Charles on video immediately. He answered, his face etched with concern before I even spoke. Edith. What's wrong? I got an email from the bank. There's a tax, a $2,850 tax to release the money. My voice sounded thin, worried. His face transformed into a mask of pure, fiery frustration. He slammed a hand softly on his desk. These blood-sucking bureaucrats. He hissed, the venom in his voice so genuine it startled me. I am so sorry, my love. I should have anticipated this. They prey on transactions like this. He took a deep breath, visibly composing himself, his eyes softening as he looked at me. Listen, this is standard, if infuriating. Graham is dealing with 3 other clients in the same situation this week. Here is what we do. He leaned in. I will wire you the $2,850 immediately, but from here to the U.S. it will take 3 banking days. If we pay it from your side now, the entire $285,000 clears tonight. The moment my transfer lands in 3 days, I will refund you that tax fee instantly. You'll have your money back before you know it, and this whole nightmare will be over. He made it sound so simple. A temporary loan, a tiny advance of trust on my part to unlock the greater good. He framed it as our problem, our solution. Are you sure? I whispered, the old caution giving one last feeble stir. Edith, he said, his voice dropping to that earnest, intimate timbre that always undid me. Look at the sum that is waiting for you, $285,000. Does it make any sense that I would jeopardize that for a mere $3,000? This is a speck of dust on the lens. We just need to wipe it away together. Together, the word was his master key. It turned my doubt into solidarity. He was right. The logic was unassailable. This was just a final, petty hurdle thrown up by a faceless system. Okay, I said, my breath releasing. Okay, I'll do it. The gratitude and love that shone from his screen was my immediate reward. You are my rock, he whispered. I logged into my real banking website, carefully typing in the URL myself, not clicking any links. My savings account, a nest egg of $22,000 meant for a new roof, stared back at me. I initiated a wire transfer to the account number listed in the official email, $2,850. I typed the number, confirmed it, the button hovered under my cursor. For a second, I saw not the numbers, but Robert's face, his practical, cautious expression. I heard David's voice, "Be careful, Mom." I closed my eyes. Then I saw Charles's face, tired from his long project, trusting me with his future. I saw the Oregon coast. I heard the promise of an end to loneliness. I clicked send. The notification flashed. Transfer initiated. I sat back. It was done. The first toll was paid. I felt a strange mix of nervous exhaustion and giddy triumph. I had acted. I had been brave. I had proven myself as a partner. The $285,000 was now surely on its way. Charles's bridge had found its first footing on my shore. The silence in the house was no longer empty. It was the quiet hum of imminent change, the breath held before a magnificent arrival. The cascade begins. The hours after sending that first wire were the longest of my life. I felt like I'd swallowed a small, frantic bird that kept beating its wings against my ribs. I paced. I'd check my bank account, the real one, logged into properly through my bookmark, hoping to see the colossal sum of $285,000 materialize. Making my paltry $2,850 advance a footnote, a joke we'd laugh about later. Nothing. Charles was a constant, reassuring presence on chat. The wheels of finance turn slowly, my love, especially across time zones. Be patient. Graham is monitoring it. His calm was a balm I soaked up greedily. He even made me laugh, sending a silly meme of a sloth dressed as a banker. This is the head of the compliance department. He wrote, it was so unexpectedly playful, so normal, it chased the shadows from the corners of my mind. By evening, the $285,000 had not arrived. Instead, a new email appeared, this one with a more urgent subject line. Final notice, federal interstate clearing fee required. My stomach dropped. I opened it. It was from the same seemingly legitimate bank address, but now it cited a different regulation because the funds were being routed through a U.S. intermediary bank in New York before reaching my regional branch. A federal interstate clearing fee of $4,200 was required to authorize the handoff. The language was even more intimidating, full of references to the Federal Reserve and penalties for transactional abandonment. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through me. This wasn't part of the plan. This was a new, taller hurdle. I video called Charles, my hands trembling so badly I could barely click the icon. He answered instantly, his face already set in lines of concern. Before I could even speak, he said, "You got another one, didn't you?" "How did you know?" "Graham just called me livid," Charles said, his voice tight with a rage that felt protective, directed at the faceless institution tormenting me. "He's dealing with it right now. He says they're inventing fees, exploiting a loophole because they see a large sum attached to a private account. It's predatory, Edith. It's disgusting." His anger mirrored my own fear, validating it, giving it a target. I wasn't paranoid. I was being preyed upon by a greedy system. "It's another $4,200, Charles. I already sent the first one." The words tasted like failure. "I know, darling, I know," he soothed, his voice dropping into that low, comforting register. "And I have already initiated the wire to cover both fees. But Edith, listen to me." He leaned forward, his blue eyes capturing mine through the screen. "If we don't pay this one now, they will cancel the entire transaction, the $285. 000 will be sent back, and all the fees, including your first 2850, will be forfeit as processing costs. We will lose everything we've put in so far." The logic was a vice sunk cost. The term floated up from some forgotten article. You keep investing because to stop is to accept a total loss. Paying more was the only way to protect what you'd already risked. "But it's so much more," I whispered, tears of frustration welling. "It's a pittance compared to what is waiting for you." He insisted, his passion flaring. These are just robbers in suits. "We are so close. The money is right there, Edith. It's in the pipeline. We just have to keep the pipeline open. Please do this for us, for our future. I am begging you. I will repay you every single cent the moment my wires clear." For us, for our future. The plea was my undoing. He wasn't just asking for money. He was asking for faith, for courage. He was on his knees in a hotel room halfway across the world, fighting a system for our shared dream. The image of him, Charles the strong, the capable, brought so low by this, ignited a fierce maternal protectiveness in me. I couldn't let them win. We were a team. "Okay," I said, my voice stronger. "Now resolved. Tell me what to do." The relief that washed over his face was my reward, more potent than any drug. "My brave, brilliant girl, go to the link, pay the fee. I am with you every second." I did. I logged back into my banking portal. My savings account now read $17,150. I sent $4,200 to another account, this one with a different official sounding name. The click of the mouse was heavier this time. The frantic bird in my chest was still. But Charles was there. He stayed on the video call with me, talking softly, not about the money, but about the cottage in Oregon. He described the sound of the waves, the color of the hydrangeas that grew wild there, the way the morning fog clung to the spruce trees. He was painting our future with his words, a beautiful, detailed mural over the cracked plaster of my anxiety. "We are building our bridge to each other," he murmured as I finally logged off the bank site, the deed done. "Every plank costs a little, but soon we will cross over forever. This is just the price of crossing from a lonely life to our life together." That night I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, the numbers swimming in the dark. $285,000 waiting, $7,050 spent. The math was supposed to be comforting, a huge gain for a small outlay. But in the silent, lonely hours, the small outlay felt very real, and the huge gain felt like a phantom, a shimmering mirage on the other side of a desert I was now committed to crossing, one expensive plank at a time. The cascade had begun, not of water, but of my own precious, dwindling security flowing into a channel, he kept telling me led to the ocean. I just had to trust the current building the fantasy. After that second payment, something shifted. It was no longer just about the money. It became a crusade, a shared secret battle Charles and I were waging against a faceless, hydra-headed bureaucracy. Every new demand, every fresh email with its ominous subject line was no longer just a shock. It was a predictable enemy tactic. And we had a strategy. He was my general, and I was his devoted lieutenant on the front lines of my own bank account. The federal interstate clearing fee was followed 48 hours later by the anti-money laundering verification charge, $5,500. The email was a masterpiece of intimidation, full of phrases like suspicious activity flag and mandatory validation protocol. It stated that to comply with the Patriot Act, I had to prove the legitimacy of the incoming funds by paying a verification bond. My blood ran cold. But Charles was ready. He was on the video call before I could even finish reading it. His face was a storm cloud. They're using fear now, he said, his voice cold and analytical. They see a vulnerable private citizen and they're trying to scare you into abandoning the transaction so they can seize the funds. It's a classic gambit. Graham is drafting a formal complaint to the regulatory body as we speak. Hearing him reframe it not as my failure, but as their corruption was like being handed a shield, my fear curdled into righteous anger. How dare they? I heard myself say, my voice trembling not with panic but with indignation. That's my girl, Charles said, a fierce pride in his eyes. Don't let them intimidate you. This is the last hurdle, I'm sure of it. Pay the bond. It's fully refundable once the verification clears, which it will, because there is nothing illegitimate about my hard-earned money. We are so close, Edith. I can feel it. So close. Those two words became our mantra, our lifeline. He wove the fantasy tighter around us with every demand. It was no longer just about retrieving his money. It was about securing our future. One evening after I'd wired the AML verification charge, my savings account now gasping at just over $11,000, he didn't talk about fees or banks. He pulled up a real estate website on his screen and shared his view. Look, he said, his voice soft with wonder. A quaint shingled cottage filled my screen, nestled in a blur of green with a sliver of blue ocean beyond. It's just come on the market. Cannon Beach, 3 bedrooms, one for us, one for Sophie when she visits, and one for your grandchildren. He said it so casually as if it were a given. That my family would visit us in this shared future. He zoomed in on the garden. See this sun exposure? Perfect for your crimson glory. We could build an arbor. I stared, mesmerized. I could see it. I could smell the salt air, feel the roughness of the shingles under my palm. He was no longer selling me a story. He was giving me the blueprints to a home. My loneliness wasn't just being soothed. It was being architecturally redesigned with a porch and a view. Another time he sent me a Spotify playlist titled Our Drive Up the Coast. It was all gentle folk and old jazz. I imagined this playing in the car, he wrote. The first time we go explore our new home together, you'll have your hand on my knee. The intimacy of the details stole my breath. It was so specific, so tangible. It felt like a memory waiting to happen. When the currency conversion bond hit for $6,800, I didn't even cry. I called him weary but resolved. They want more, Charles. He sighed, not with frustration, but with the weary determination of a man facing the last mile of a marathon. Of course they do. The vultures are circling the finish line. But Edith, darling, think of it this way. That $285,000 is just the beginning. My final project closure bonus, another 5,000, is being processed separately next week. Once we break through this wall, it will all flow freely. We're not just paying fees. We're buying the key to the kingdom. Our kingdom, he was expanding the horizon. The prize was doubling before my eyes. The sums I was sending were no longer fees. They were investments in a cottage, in a drive up the coast, in a life where I was not alone. Every wire transfer was followed by an emotional deposit from him, so rich it felt like it balanced the scales. He'd send a single red rose emoji for my crimson glory. He'd read me poetry over the call Yeats about growing old together. He'd describe the kitchen in the cottage and ask how I'd arrange the pans. I was no longer Edith Mayfair, the scam victim. In the narrative we were co-writing, I was Edith, the steadfast heroine. I was persevering. Where others would have quit, I was proving my trust, my loyalty, my worth. I was earning my happy ending not through passive waiting, but through brave financial action. The fantasy was a fortress, and every dollar I sent was a stone in its wall, blocking out the skeptical world, the worried children, the nagging voice of my own dwindling common sense. Inside the fortress, it was just Charles and me building our bridge, plank by expensive plank, our hands metaphorically clasped as we paid the tolls. To cross from our lonely pasts into the glorious sun-drenched future he painted with such exquisite, heartbreaking detail. The money felt less like currency and more like a sacred offering, the required sacrifice to finally arrive at the life I'd stopped believing I deserved. Draining the reserves, there is a particular silence that comes from an empty space where something vital once lived. It's different from the quiet of an unused room. It's the echo after a theft. My savings account was the first to go silent. That $22,000 nest egg, Robert had called it the rainy day fund with a practical smile. Wasn't for a storm, it was for a new roof. The shingles were curling at the edges, and David had pointed it out on his last visit. We should get some quotes this summer, Mom, he'd said. Now the rainy day fund was gone, wired in chunks of $2,850, $4,200, $5,500. The rain could fall right through for all I could do about it now. The account balance stared back at me, $0.0. It wasn't a number. It was a mouth held open in a soundless scream. The silence spread. Next was the CD, the certificate of deposit that had always sounded so solid, so irrevocable, locked away at the credit union. It was my later fund. For what, I never quite decided. Maybe a surprise for the grandchildren, maybe a nice trip if I ever felt brave enough to travel alone. I sat in the sterile, friendly office of the credit union, the same one Robert and I had opened decades ago. Pam, the branch manager who knew me by name, smiled warmly. Early withdrawal, Edith? Everything all right? My face felt like a porcelain mask, a careful, smiling lie. Oh, just a little investment opportunity. I want to move on, I said, the words ash in my mouth. And my roof, you know. It was a half-truth wrapped in the ghost of a truth. Pam's smile became sympathetic. Ah, those home repairs. Nasty business. The penalty will be $750. I'm afraid. Still want to proceed? $750, just another fee, another toll on the bridge. What was $750 against the $500,000 Charles said was coming? It was a splinter from a plank. Yes, I said, my voice clear and firm. Please proceed. The paperwork was signed. The penalty was deducted. $14,250 was wired to my checking account, and from there it began its swift digital migration. Then came the stocks, Robert's stocks. He wasn't a wealthy man, but he was careful, a believer in putting something away. He'd bought shares in a few solid blue-chip companies, a household goods manufacturer, an electric utility, boring money, he'd joke, but it'll be there. They were the last threads of the financial safety net. He had woven for me the final buffer between me and the bare wire of existence. Liquidating them required a phone call to a broker I'd never spoken to. A young, brisk voice said, "Selling all of it, Mrs. Mayfair?" "Market conditions are quite favorable at the moment." "Yes," I said, staring out the window at the crimson glory rose, blooming valiantly, unknowingly, next to a house whose financial foundations were being pulled out from under it. All of it. The process took days. Days during which Charles was a constant comforting hum in my ear. He knew the strain I was under. "You are so strong, my love. You are doing this for us. When I am there, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to think about money again. You'll have gardens, not spreadsheets." When the stock money landed a final, breathtaking $19,430 after commissions, it felt like the last chapter of Robert's care for me had been converted into pure liquid potential. It was the ultimate act of transference. I was taking the love and security of my past husband and investing it in the promised future with a new one. I didn't just send the money, I performed a ritual. I'd light a single candle on the desk, a silly, superstitious act. I'd pull up Charles's picture on my screen. I'd look into his kind eyes and I'd tell him in a whisper, this is it. This is the last of it. Each transfer was a leap of faith over a widening canyon. The far side where Charles stood with open arms and a cottage by the sea was shimmering, beautiful, detailed down to the hydrangeas. The side I was leaping from was crumbling into dust and silence behind me. My savings were silent. My CD was silent. The dividend notices from the stocks would now never come. The only sound left was the frantic, hopeful beat of my own heart and the melodic, reassuring voice of Charles painting pictures of the ocean to drown out the deafening quiet of my own ruin. I was pouring the tangible, careful legacy of my old life into the golden gossamer promise of a new one. I was draining the reserves not just of my bank accounts, but of my caution, my self-preservation, my very history. All that remained was the bridge, slender and shining, that he kept assuring me was one plank away from being complete, the ghost in her own life. I became a curator of my own ghost story. I moved through the real world, my world as a silent, smiling specter, my true existence tethered to the glowing screen and the man who lived inside it. My children's calls, once the lifelines I clung to, now felt like intrusions. The ringing phone was a jarring alarm, pulling me from the sacred focused space where Charles and I built our future. I'd see David's name flash and a wave of irritation would follow the initial ping of guilt. Not now. I'm in the middle of something important. One Tuesday afternoon, he called just as Charles was explaining a complex point about the federal revenue assurance hold. I let it go to voicemail. Later, listening to his message, his voice sounded tinny and far away. Hey, Mom, just checking in. Melissa said she hasn't been able to reach you. Give us a call when you can. Love you. There was a hint of worry, a faint scratch on the surface of his busy life voice. I deleted it. I'd call tomorrow or the next day. Melissa was more persistent. Her calls were like bird taps on a window, quick, bright, multiple. She facetimed one Sunday morning, the time she usually reserved for me. I saw her face, lively and slightly flushed, her boys bobbing in the background. I was at my desk, an email from Graham's office open, a payment portal waiting. Mom, there you are. We've been trying you. We're at the park. The boys are filthy. It's chaos. I just wanted to see your face. Her noise was overwhelming, a beautiful, chaotic cacophony that now felt like static disrupting a clear, vital signal. I forced a bright smile, my everything's fine mask clicking into place. Oh, honey, it looks like fun. I was just paying some bills online. The lie was smooth, automatic on a Sunday. Mom, you work too hard at relaxing, she laughed. Then her eyes, so like Robert's, sharpened slightly. You look tired. Are you sleeping okay? The concern, which once would have been a bomb, now felt like an accusation, a probe. She was looking too closely. She might see the shadows under my eyes from late-night calls across time zones. She might sense the frantic energy thrumming beneath my calm facade. I'm perfectly fine, Melissa, I said, my voice a touch too sharp, the mask slipping. I have a life, you know. I'm not just waiting by the phone for you children to remember I exist. The words hung in the digital space between us, cruel and untrue. Her face fell, the brightness wiped clean. I had wounded her. The guilt was immediate and searing, but it was quickly smothered by a defensive, righteous anger. Why couldn't they understand? I had something real now, too, Mom. Of course you have a life. She faltered. I'm busy, dear. Give the boys a kiss. We'll talk soon. I ended the call before she could respond. The silence after was not the old loneliness. It was a fortified quiet, a moat I had dug myself. I had pushed her out to protect the precious, fragile kingdom inside my computer. I became an expert deflector. Book club emails went unanswered. Lunches with Paula and Jean were canceled with vague, unquestionable excuses. A touch of sinus trouble. The gardener is coming. They were the busy brush-offs I had so often received, now weaponized by my own hand. My real life became a series of empty sets. The grocery store was a place to buy the bare minimum, my mind rehearsing explanations for Charles about the latest bank demand. The post office was an errand to send nothing to no one. The house was no longer a home to be lived in. It was a shell where I waited for the next communication, the next step in the intricate dance. I stopped looking at the photographs on the walls. The faces of my family, of Robert, felt like portraits of people from a previous century. Their smiles were fixed, their stories complete. Charles's face, alive and animated on my screen, was the present. He was the narrative. He was the one asking, "What do you think, Edith? How do you feel about this, my love?" He made me the author, not just a relic. The ghost of me would drift to the mailbox, retrieve bills, and set them aside unopened. What did a water bill matter when I was negotiating the release of $500,000? What did a property tax notice signify when I was about to own a cottage in Oregon? My old responsibilities, the mundane anchors of my life, lost all weight. They were the concerns of a person who no longer existed. I was haunting my own life, a faint echo in the halls, while my true essence, my hopes, my capital, my very soul, were invested in a digital phantom and the radiant future he promised. The loneliness I had fought for so long was gone. In its place was a terrible focused isolation, a self-imposed exile from everyone who had ever truly loved me for the sake of a love that existed only in the blue light of a screen and in the increasingly hollow chambers of my own heart. The final fee, the air in the house had changed. It wasn't just silence anymore. It was the thin, frigid air of high altitude. I was nearing the summit, Charles promised. Every ragged breath, every straining muscle was for this. The view would be spectacular. My checking account, that once familiar ledger of grocery bills and pharmacy co-pays, had become a stranger. Its numbers were now in charge of me. The last of the stock money, the final sacred 19 for 30, had been whittled away by a series of ever more creatively named obligations. A governor's assurance fee for $1,200. A cross-border settlement finalization, $6,750. Each time the emails grew more urgent, the consequences more dire. Total forfeiture, account seizure, legal notification. Each time Charles was there, a steady, furious presence in my ear. "It's the last gate, Edith. The final guard demanding a bribe. We are inches away. Inches, after thousands of miles, after tens of thousands of dollars. Inches felt like a distance I could crawl." That morning, the email arrived. Immediate action required. Final. Receiving fee, but a pittance, I discovered, can be an insurmountable mountain. I logged into my bank's website, my fingers moving by rote, already numb. I navigated to the transfers page. I typed in the account number from the email. I entered the amount, $1,200.0. I clicked continue. A red banner exploded across the screen. Transaction error, insufficient funds. The words were clinical. Digital, they carried no emotion, which made them all the more horrifying. I stared. I refreshed the page. I logged out and logged back in a frantic, superstitious ritual. The balance was unequivocal, $17.38, $17.38. The cost of a pizza, a paperback book, and a coffee, not the final receiving fee for a fortune. A cold, clean clarity washed over me, freezing the frantic buzz in my veins. This was it, the end of the road. There was nothing left to scrape from. The barrel, the rainy day fund, was a drought. The later fund was spent. Robert's careful stocks were dust. I was a financial ghost. I opened the video call to Charles with a hand that was eerily steady. He answered, his face already arranged in its familiar pattern of concerned expectation. "My love, is it the final notification?" "Charles," I said. My voice was flat, a dead thing. "I can't pay it." He blinked, his smile faltering only slightly. "What do you mean?" "The $1,200? Darling, it's nothing. After all, I don't have it." The words hung between us, simple and absolute. A flicker passed over his face, impatience. Annoyance? It was gone so fast I doubted I saw it, replaced by profound sympathy. "There must be something, Edith. A credit line? A loan against the house? We are so close. This is the final step." He said it with such passionate conviction, such practiced urgency. But for the first time, the music of his persuasion couldn't drown out the percussion of my reality, the hollow thud of zeros where my savings used to be, the silent scream of the closed CD account. "There is nothing," I repeated, and now a crack appeared in the flatness, a raw, desperate tremor. "I have $17 in my checking account, Charles. $17 I have sent you. I have sent over $52,000. There is nothing left to give, not a cent." I was weeping now, the tears hot and shameful. These weren't the elegant, understood tears of shared frustration. These were the ugly, gasping sobs of total depletion. I was a dry well. On the screen, his expression underwent a subtle seismic shift. The sympathetic concern didn't vanish, but it hardened around the edges. It cooled like molten glass being dipped in water. The warmth in his blue eyes didn't fade. It receded, pulling back to reveal a calmer, more calculating depth. He was looking at me, but he was no longer seeing me, the woman, the lighthouse. He was assessing a resource, a depleted mine. Alone against the house, he repeated, his voice low, reasonable. It's a simple process, Edith. The equity is there. We could have the funds in a matter of days. This is no time to lose our nerve. Our nerve, the phrase which had once meant shared courage, now felt like a whip. I had no nerve left. It had been spent, wired away in increments. I can't, I whispered, the last of my strength going into those two words. I have nothing. The connection held. For 5 long seconds, he just looked at me. His face was an impassive, handsome mask. The kind crinkles were still there, but they seemed like carved lines now, not laughter lines. He was waiting, I realized, waiting to see if this was a ploy, if there was one more secret drawer to open. Seeing nothing but the shattered reality in my tear-streaked face, his expression settled into something final, not anger, not sadness, a kind of remote professional disappointment, without a word, without a change in his breathing. The screen went black, not a flicker, not a goodbye, not a "I'll fix this," just black. I sat in the sudden, absolute silence. The only sound was the ragged hitch of my own breath and the low hum of the computer. I reached a trembling finger out and touched the dark screen. It was warm. I whispered his name into the void. Charles? Nothing. I typed a message. The call dropped. A tiny red icon appeared next to my text. Failed to send. I clicked on his name, his profile, the beautiful coastline, his smiling face. Was gone, vanished, as if he had never been there at all. In the reflection of the black screen, I saw my own face, gaunt, eyes wide with a horror too deep for immediate comprehension. I was not just broke. I was alone in a way I had never been before. The silence that returned wasn't the old familiar quiet. It was the sound of the universe collapsing into a single suffocating point, a $17.38. Balance and a darkness where a man's face used to be. The silence returns. If the previous silence had been a heavy velvet, this new silence was lead. It wasn't an absence of sound. It was the annihilation of it. It pressed down from the ceiling, rose up from the floors, squeezed in from the walls until the very molecules of air felt too thick to pull into my lungs. I did not move from the desk. The black screen was a monolith, an obsidian tombstone for a man who had never existed. My body had become a statue of shock, yet inside, a silent, seismic wrecking ball was swinging, methodically demolishing the beautiful architecture of the last 2 months. The cottage by the sea, crash, the sound of the waves, the hydrangeas, the porch gone, revealed as a painted backdrop, the shared future, the team, crash, the bridge. Every lovingly described plank splintered into nothing. His voice, his laugh, his understanding, crash, crash, crash. Each memory, each whispered endearment, each promise didn't fade. It inverted. "You are my lighthouse" became a taunt. "We are so close" became the hook that had reeled me into the abyss. The Sinatra song, the rose emojis, the talk of my grace, all of it curdled in my mind, transforming from treasures into the meticulously chosen tools of a predator. The shame arrived next. It didn't wash over me. It erupted from within, a vile, hot geyser that scalded my insides. It was a physical sensation, a nausea so profound I doubled over, my forehead pressing against the cool wood of the desk. $52,000. The number finally landed, not as a sum of money, but as a measure of my stupidity, my profound, world-class, devastating gullibility. I thought of David's practical face, his unspoken worry, Melissa's sharp, loving eyes that had seen my tiredness. "Are you sleeping okay?" They had known, some part of them had sensed a disturbance in my orbit, and I had snapped at them. I had chosen the phantom over my own flesh and blood. I thought of Robert, of his careful plans, his rainy day fund, his boring money stocks, every cent he had worked for, every safety net he had meticulously knitted for my future. I had gathered in my arms and joyfully hurled into a pit, believing I was planting a garden. A sound escaped me then, not a sob, but a dry, retching heave, empty of everything but horror. I was ruined, not just financially, though that was catastrophically true. I was morally bankrupt. I had betrayed the trust of my late husband. I had rejected the love of my children. For what? For the exquisite attention of a ghost, for the feeling of being chosen. I had sold my legacy, my dignity, my family's peace of mind for a handful of digital fairy dust. The weight of it was paralyzing. I could not conceive of standing up, of walking, of ever leaving this chair. How could I face the world? The sun outside the window was an obscenity. How dare it shine? How dare the roses bloom? The entire indifferent continuation of the universe was a cruelty. I sat there as the afternoon light bled from gold to gray to the deep blue of evening. The room darkened. I didn't turn on a lamp. The blue glow was gone, leaving only the suffocating dark. I was a pinpoint of pure, concentrated shame in the center of a vast, echoing emptiness. This was the silence I had tried so desperately to fill. I had mistaken it for loneliness, but I was wrong. Loneliness was a hollow space that could be filled with memory, with phone calls, with the ghost of a touch. This was different. This was the void left after a supernova. It was the absolute zero of trust, of self-respect, of future. Charles hadn't just taken my money. He had taken my story. He had rewritten my past 2 months as a farce and erased my future as a possibility. He had left me with nothing but this crushing, leaden silence and the echoing, mocking refrain, $52,000, $52,000. I was no longer a woman. I was a cautionary tale sitting in the dark, and the worst part, the part that twisted the knife of shame ever deeper, was the realization that the most attentive, the most interested, the most validating relationship of my later years had been a transaction, and I had bankrupted myself paying for it, the reckoning 3 days. I lived in the leaden silence for 3 days. I did not eat. Sips of water from the bathroom tap were a mechanical act. Sleep was a fleeting, treacherous escape where I'd dream of Charles's smiling face morphing into a grinning skull or of endless wire transfer forms floating in a void. I'd jolt awake, the shame fresh and wet, a cold sweat on my skin. The house became a crime scene I wandered through. Every object was a witness. The desk chair where I'd sat and been dismantled, the computer, the weapon, the checkbook with its thin, pathetic register, the evidence. I was both the victim and the perpetrator, and the sentence was this unbearable solitary confinement with my own stupidity. On the morning of the fourth day, a weak gray light filtering through the blinds, a primal instinct cut through the catatonia. It wasn't courage, it was the biological need of a wounded animal for its pack. Even if the pack was going to see the gaping, self-inflicted wound, I picked up the phone. My fingers, clumsy and cold, found David's number. I pressed call before I could think. He answered on the second ring, his voice bright with the effort of a busy morning. Mom, hey, I was just thinking about you. You've been quiet. The sound of his voice, so normal, so real, shattered the last of my frozen control. A raw, animal noise tore from my throat across between a sob and a gag. I couldn't form words. Mom? His voice sharpened, all brightness gone. Mom, what's wrong? Are you hurt? Can you speak? I tried, Vid, it was a croak. I'm calling an ambulance. Are you at home? No. The word was a burst of panic. No ambulance. Home, please. Come. The line was silent for a beat. I heard the muffled sounds of his world, a car door, the jingle of keys. I'm on my way. I'm leaving right now. Stay on the phone with me. Can't, I whispered. Just come. The drive from Denver was for hours. He made it in 3. I know because I sat at the kitchen table, the only place I could think to wait and watch the clock's hands move through the terrible silent space. When his key turned in the lock, he still had one. From when he used to check on the house, I flinched. The sound of another person in my sanctuary of shame was a violation. He came in, a whirlwind of concern and cold air. He took me in unwashed, in the same clothes I'd worn for days, my face a map of devastation and his own face crumpled. He crossed the room into strides and knelt beside my chair, taking my icy hands in his warm ones. Mom, my God, what is it? Is it your heart? Did you get a diagnosis? His mind went to the physical, the understandable. A disease would have been a mercy. I shook my head, tears streaming silently now. I couldn't look at him. I reached a trembling hand to the side of the table where I had stacked the papers. Not the emails, those were ghosts in the machine, but the printed wire transfer confirmations. From my own bank, the receipts for my own annihilation. I slid them toward him. The confusion on his face as he took them was almost worse than the anger I feared. He scanned the first one, then the second, his brow furrowed. He began to sort through them, his movements becoming quicker, more urgent. I watched as understanding dawned. It didn't flash. It descended, a slow, terrible eclipse, his face usually so animated, so my son drained of color, his jaw tightened, the papers trembled in his hands. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a horror that mirrored my own. "Mom," he said, his voice strangled. "What? What are these? What did you do?" He needed. "Help," I whispered, the pathetic lie of the original story still my only framework, the taxes. They kept. David's eyes scanned the amounts again, adding mentally. He reached the last one, the $4,200 governor's assurance fee. He dropped the stack on the table as if it had burned him. He stood up, turning away from me, running both hands through his hair. He made a sound, a low groan of pure anguish. "Oh, Mom, no, oh God, no, please tell me you didn't, please." He turned back, and I saw it then, not just anger, but a devastating personal pain. I had not just been scammed, I had been stolen from, and he was my son, and he had failed to protect me. The guilt and fury warred in his eyes. He had to make calls. He moved like an automaton, pulling out his phone. First, the local police non-emergency line. His voice was clipped, professional, as he explained his elderly mother was the victim of a significant online fraud. He gave my address. He asked for a detective, then the bank. He put it on speaker, his arm around my shuddering shoulders as he held the phone. He identified himself, gave my details, explained we needed to report fraudulent transactions and freeze the account. The customer service representative's voice was polite, detached. "I'm very sorry to hear that, sir. I can see the outgoing wire transfers you're referring to. Unfortunately, as these were authorized transactions initiated by the account holder, we have no recourse to retrieve the funds. The money is gone. We can close the account. To prevent further outflows authorized, the money is gone." The woman's calm, disembodied voice made it final, official, a death certificate for my financial life. David thanked her, his voice hollow. He hung up and looked at me. The detective from the police would be a formality, he explained gently, his anger now buried under a mountain of grief. The money was in untraceable cryptocurrency accounts, likely overseas. It was gone. The formality arrived an hour later, a detective named Alvarez. Kind-eyed, but with a weary resignation about him, he took the papers, asked gentle, probing questions. What was his name? Do you have any photos? Did you ever video call? I answered in monosyllables, each one a shard of glass in my throat. He nodded, taking notes. "It's a very common romance scam, Mrs. Mayfair. They're professionals, very convincing." His kindness was a second knife. It absolved me just enough to make my own culpability feel even more acute after he left, promising to file the report. But offering little hope, the silence in the kitchen was different. It was no longer just mine, it was shared. David sat across from me, the wreckage of my life spread between us on the polished table. He looked older. We looked at each other, not as mother and son for a moment, but as two survivors of the same shipwreck, washed up on a shore of ruin and paperwork. The reckoning had arrived, and it was only the beginning, the unasked question. David did not ask me to pack a bag. He simply went upstairs and did it for me, moving through my bedroom with a grim, efficient tenderness. I heard drawers open and close, the soft zip of a suitcase. He was packing the essentials of a prisoner being taken into protective custody. In a way he led me to his car, a hand under my elbow as if I were infirm. I was a shell, my insides scoured clean by shame. The 4-hour drive back to Denver passed in a blur of gray highway and his quiet, focused presence. He didn't turn on the radio. The silence between us was a living thing, swollen with everything unsaid. His house, when we arrived, was a symphony of noise. His wife, Chloe, met us at the door, her face a mask of compassionate shock. She hugged me, her scent of citrus and clean linen a shocking assault on my senses. The twins, Liam and Deva, now gangly teenagers, hovered in the background, their eyes wide with a confusion they were too polite to voice. Grandma's going to stay with us for a while, David said, his voice too bright, a forced normalcy that rang false in the entryway. I was installed in the guest room. It was beautiful, a quilt made by Chloe's mother, a reading lamp, a view of the Rockies. It felt like a very nice cell. The vibrant, chaotic life of the family pressed in from all sides, the thump of music from a teenager's room, the beep of the microwave, the burst of laughter over a YouTube video. Each sound was a tiny hammer on the raw nerve of my existence. My silence had been absolute. Theirs was richly, abundantly populated. I was an alien artifact, placed in the center of a thriving ecosystem. For days, I moved through their home like a ghost. I'd help Chloe dry dishes, my hands moving mechanically. I'd sit in the living room while the TV played, seeing nothing. The shame was a shroud I wore, visible to everyone, I was sure. David and Chloe spoke in hushed tones in the kitchen. I caught snippets. Power of attorney. Speak to a financial advisor. Mom's house. My house, the architecture of my silence. It was now an asset to be managed, a liability. The thought made me want to disappear. David worked from home. He set up his laptop at the kitchen table, and one afternoon he called me over. His face was etched with a new kind of exhaustion, the kind that comes from wrestling with columns of numbers that tell a terrible story. Mom, he said gently, pulling out a chair for me, we need to talk about what's left. We need to make a budget. The word was a splash of cold water. Budget. It belonged to young couples starting out, to college students, not to a widow in her 60s who had thrown a lifetime of prudence to the wind. He opened a spreadsheet. There, in stark, emotionless Times New Roman, was the autopsy of my financial life. Assets, house estimated value, less mortgage a number that seemed abstract, Social Security a pittance, remaining IRA untouched, thankfully a small, fragile egg, liabilities, monthly bills, utilities, insurance. Property tax, living expenses deficit, a red negative number that seemed to pulse on the screen. He talked about downsizing, about selling the house, about what my Social Security could realistically cover in a small apartment. He spoke gently, rationally, but each word was a nail in the coffin of my independence. I listened, nodding, a compliant child. The fight was gone. I deserved this. I deserved the loss of my home, my autonomy, my dignity. Then he stopped. He closed the laptop with a soft click. He rubbed his eyes, and when he looked at me, the professional facade was gone. In its place was the raw, wounded face of my little boy, the one who used to bring me dandelions. Mom, he said, his voice thick, I need to ask you something, and I need you to try to answer me. I braced myself. Why didn't you tell us? How could you be so stupid? I deserved all of it, but his question wasn't an accusation. It was a plea for understanding born from a pain deeper than anger. What did he give you? David asked, his eyes searching mine, desperate and weary that we didn't. The air left the room of all the questions, all the recriminations I had prepared for. This was the one I could not face. It wasn't about the money. It was about the currency of the heart. I looked away out the window at the majestic, indifferent Rockies. I saw the empty chair in my sunroom. I heard the echo of my own voice in the hall. I felt the vast, yawning hunger for a conversation that didn't end with, gotta run, Mom. He had given me his time, his full, undivided, lavish attention. He had made the silence go away, not with noise, but with a focused, affirming presence that made me feel like I was the only person in his world. My children gave me love, but it was a love stretched thin across mergers and soccer games and their own weary lives. Charles's love, though a poison lie, had been concentrated, undiluted, and served to me in a golden cup. To say that to David would be the cruelest cut of all. It would be to tell him that his love, however real, was not enough, that his busy, successful life was the very thing that had left me starving. So I sat in the silence of his question, the truth a burning coal on my tongue. The unasked question had been asked, and my inability to answer it, to speak that devastating truth aloud, hung between us, the real unmanageable debt in the room, far greater than the one on the spreadsheet. The raw currency, the silence after his question, was the most profound of all. It wasn't the leaden silence of my empty house, nor the shocked silence after the screen went black. This was a living, breathing silence, dense with the pain of his question and the catastrophic answer I held inside me. I looked away from the mountains, back to my son's face, to the man he was, with his father's kind eyes and his own life's weariness etched around them. He wasn't demanding. He was broken open, truly needing to understand how the fortress of his mother had been breached. The truth was a creature with sharp edges lodged in my chest. To give it voice would wound him, perhaps irrevocably, but the lie a polite deflection, a mumbled excuse would be a second betrayal. He deserved the terrible honesty, even if it shattered us both. My gaze fell to my hands, twisted together on the polished table. They were the same hands that had typed messages to a phantom, that had signed the wire transfers. I watched them as if from a distance, and I spoke to them, my voice a dry rustle in the quiet kitchen. He gave me his time. The words hung there, simple and devastating. David didn't flinch. He just watched me, his expression unreadable. I continued, the dam cracking. He made the silence go away, not with noise, not with just checking in. I finally looked up, meeting his eyes, letting him see the raw, shameful need. He listened as if I were the only thing in his world for hours. He remembered what I said a week later. He made me feel necessary, not just loved, but needed. I saw the understanding pass over David's face, and it was not anger. It was a dawning, horrified recognition. He saw it not as a critique of his love, but as a map of my famine. He saw the busy, distracted currency of his calls, the love diluted by distance and duty, stacked against the counterfeit but concentrated gold of a predator's full attention. He didn't speak for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached across the table and covered my hands with his. His grip was warm, solid, real. "Oh, Mom," he whispered. The words a sigh of shared grief. In that touch, in that acknowledgement, the raw currency of the truth was finally exchanged. It wasn't a solution. It didn't bring the money back. It didn't magically erase the shame or rebuild the savings. But it altered the silence. The loneliness I had carried for years was no longer a private, shameful island. It was now a shared continent between us, newly discovered and brutally mapped. My financial ruin was a tangible crisis we could manage with spreadsheets and hard choices. But this emotional bankruptcy, this hunger that had made me vulnerable, was the deeper debt. And by speaking it, by having him hear it, the debt was no longer mine alone to carry. It was the beginning of a new, painful kind of intimacy. One built not on the easy assumptions of family, but on the wreckage of a shared failure. His failure to see my depth of need, my failure to ask for it in a way he could hear. Later that week, Melissa flew in. She didn't bring the boys. She came alone, a soldier arriving at the front. When she hugged me, she held on for a long time, her body shaking with silent tears. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she breathed into my hair. "I'm so sorry. I was too busy to see." We didn't talk much about Charles. We talked about the budget, about the plan for the house, but now the conversations were different. David would pause his work to ask, "Mom, tell me about that Rose book you're reading." It was stilted, an effort, but it was effort directed. Melissa called every evening just for 5 minutes, and she would just listen, even if I had nothing to say but the weather. The road ahead was brutally clear. The sale of my home, a small rental apartment, a life pared down to the bone. The loneliness remained, a familiar ache. But it was no longer a secret. It was a patient we were all learning to tend, however awkwardly. The scam had stolen my money, my security, and my story. But in its terrible wake, it forced a brutal, necessary truth into the light of my family's love. I was no longer a lighthouse in a fictional fog, but a wounded woman in a well-lit room, and I was not alone in the silence anymore. The quiet now held their presence, their imperfect, trying real attention, a currency that was poor, but it was genuine, and for the first time I was beginning to understand its worth. And so we reach the end of Edith's story, a stark reminder that loneliness can be the most expensive vulnerability of all. If her journey resonated with you or opened your eyes to the emotional mechanics of these scams, please do one important thing: share this video with someone you care about, a friend, a family member, especially an older loved one who might be feeling isolated. Your share could be the conversation that protects them from becoming the next victim. These criminals are experts in weaving stories that feel more real than reality. Awareness is our best defense. If you'd like to see more stories that explore the hidden corners of human nature, the vulnerabilities we don't speak about, and the resilience that follows, please subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for caring. Stay safe, stay connected, and we'll see you in the next video.